My name is Yolanda Demaree, Contract Decorating, a company I've had for 38 years. We are at a home in Harrodsburg, 712 Beaumont Inn Road, and this is the home of Carolyn Cole. Carolyn Cole has lived in this house for 12 plus years. It was a wreck when she acquired this home, in as much as it had been in several different phases and had not been restored since the 60s, I believe. They did a pretty extensive remodel. About the only thing they didn't require replacing was the roof. So the house has been painted a few times, I think at least twice in the time she's had it, maybe a third time. And we're going to go around and look at the phases of the home and the prep work to do to it and the reason for the prep work. This specific column is one of the first examples I have. If you're able to see the top of this column, it has a lot of cracking, splitting, and fracturing to it. The bottom of the same column had that much as well. However, we have done prep work to this part of the column. See the weep hose in the bottom of the top and in the top of this one. Typically, a column has weep hose in the bottom. The reason it would have a weep hole in the bottom is because if moisture gets in a column, it has the ability to shed the water. Moisture gets in columns through a heavy rain, snow. It has a freeze-thaw cycle, which causes it to expand and contract in the winter months. The side of the house that I have chose to start on is surrounded by large trees. That causes this side of the house to have a great deal of mildew and moisture problems. And the moisture problems is an enemy of a good paint job. In this instance, you can tell that some of this wood that has been replaced in the last 12 years has already rotted and caused some integrity problems. This is original to the house. The reason I chose this column is this house was built in the 1840s, 1846, I believe. And so that makes this column 150, 170 years old. It looks better than the new wood that got added on. Now, this has good integrity, but the paint job has had some trouble over time. What we did in the bottom portion of this column, from here to just past the weep hole, is we sanded off the cracking, splitting paint and got it to a stable substrate. What I mean by stable substrate is when paint cracks and chips, as you're seeing over here, it's not stable. I can put my hand under it, remove it, and moisture will get under it and cause it to blister and pop. In this instance, we've taken all of the loose paint off here, down to the top, first demarcation at the top, we took the loose paint off. The second portion, we took the loose paint off, we sanded, scraped, and primed the second portion down. Our third portion from here down, we sanded, scraped, primed, and put 2 coats of finish paint. This specific area has some large shoulders. We use mechanical sanding on the large shoulders to ease the shoulders. Shoulder being when you have paint that has broken its integrity and you have something that stands proud. When you sand the shoulders, you get it back to a stable position where water will not get under that and will remain a good paint job. A historic or a preservation job, you don't try to make it look like it's 20 years old. This is part of the integrity of this home. However, you want it stable and to be able to live for a number of years. So this portion has been sanded, prepped, and 2 coats of finish paint. Should last for a good long time. And you can see again how different it is from the top to the bottom. This is a column that we wanted to show the effect of mildew on. So we washed the bottom portion of this column, and we have put 2 coats of finish paint on the bottom portion of this column. This column was painted 2 years ago, and that's the impact that mildew can have on an existing paint job. Now, the paint that we are putting on today is a paint that has had mildewcide, a chemical additive, added to the paint. And if we come back in 2 years or 4 years, that paint film would look just as white as it does today. However, you can tell at the top, a mildewcide or no preparation was done the last time this was painted. So you have the gray cast where this side of the house gets the moisture and the weather, and that's the difference in what a mildewcide is going to do for that paint job. I'm going to move around the house and show some different elements that we have worked on in this house. We are in the front of the residence now, and this is the side that gets a lot of weather but more sunlight, so we don't have nearly the mildew problems we have on the side. But this specific element of the home is wood and has had a lot of coats of paint over the years. And you can see from this portion that the appropriate prep work has not been done. There's very heavy shoulders and heavy build in this part of the slat work. We did work on the other side, and I'm going to show you yet again the 3 steps we've done. I'm reiterating that prep work is the important piece of any paint job. If you don't do the appropriate prep work, you're not going to get the best paint job. If we come in here and tried to paint this house in 3 or 4 days, we would not get a job that would last the client for years to come, and we would not protect her substrates. In order to protect the substrates and get the best work, you want to remove the loose and peeling paint, and we have done that up to the 3rd piece of blue tape. We've removed the loose and peeling paint. We have sanded and scraped, and we have sanded, scraped, and 2 coats of paint. If you look at that portion where we have done all the prep work, all the painting, and compare it to the portion directly across from it, you will see how dramatically different the paint job would look if the appropriate prep work was done. So even in this stage of prep work, you can see there's still a lot of shoulders and a lot of part of the wood that's not stable yet. Getting the wood stable makes all the difference in this wood keeping its integrity. When we first got here, we noticed that some of these slats had small nails in them or little thumbtacks to hold the slats in place. That's because somebody didn't do the right work. When the slats are coming loose, you put a liquid epoxy or a more permanent solution in there so water doesn't get behind them and cause them permanent damage. So we have done the appropriate things as we go up, and it's pretty readily apparent the difference in this and that portion over there. Talking about products for just a couple of minutes. In all of the paint stores, they have Bondo, they have epoxy, they have liquid epoxy, and they have putties that have been stabilized with epoxy hardeners. And there's a liquid epoxy. These are different elements of stabilizing a paint job. A 150-year-old residence, or 170, is always going to have warts. That's part of living with an older residence. This is something we didn't tear into because this specific element is about 4 days worth of the right kind of prep work. Digging it out, getting back to dead wood that's stable. If you look at this, you can see that that's not stable. A big portion of this needs to come out. It needs to be made stable. It needs to have hardeners applied to it. It needs to have liquid epoxy and Bondo applied to it. And then it needs to be primed, mechanically sanded, and then the wart has gone away. Now, in the past, it's been painted over multiple times. A good paint job and good restoration work should catch this, because even though it's a wart, it's a natural part of this house and should be repaired. On the bottom, we did a similar process to all 3 panels. Now, panels are a little different than slat work in as much as these panels have been caulked for many years. Caulking will make a panel more stable, but if it's a batten and seal panel, it needs to be allowed to breathe. These have been here for so long, they've been caulked so many times that caulking these is a natural part of this process. And it is in most restoration work. These 3 panels, just the panels, have been all scraped. This one has been scraped and sanded. This one has been scraped, sanded, and 2 coats of paint. You will notice that we chose the heaviest abraded one to paint. We did that because of the shoulders. You can see that this one was in terrible shape when we started it. And we evened out the edges of the shoulders by mechanically sanding it with palm sanders. And once we got the shoulders stable, then we went back and added 2 coats of paint, and we wouldn't consider putting paint on this house without it having the mildewcide in it because of its issues. So this is the difference in what that looks like after prep work. Now, when we were here in this area, I went ahead and had some caulking done. I'm not sure you can see me. I'll let you come back to this. But we had some caulking done where the column meets the base of the column. It's naturally going to have some movement and need to be caulked. And we caulked around the base of that column so you could see it when you come back. We have moved around the corner to the very front part of the house, which is the front porch. And as you can see, there are 4 columns on the front porch, and columns are the most difficult part of architecture to prevent damage to. Columns have very bad freeze-thaw problems. Why do they have freeze-thaw problems? Columns are usually laminated, as you can see the pieces going around this column. And the lamination of the column allows moisture to get into the column, both from rain and snow and just general absorption. And the moisture needs a way out. It's got enough coats of paint that it's not going to evaporate. It needs weep hose at the bottom of columns. Oftentimes, columns have weep hose in the bottom of them, and they also have weep hose in the base of them. Weep hose just lets the moisture come out, which prevents so much freeze-thaw damage to a column. However, every column has freeze-thaw damage. And this one has years of it, as you can look at from around the base, and we'll talk more about this base in a moment, but the element here has come away. Now, in a previous paint job, they just filled it up and left the wart. They didn't get rid of it. Here you can see the movement of the wood. Here you can see shoulders. You can see all of the damage that is done to the bottom of this column in its phases. Here we have done what we talked about earlier, just sanding it. No other restoration work to it. From here over, we have sanded, scraped, and primed. You can see down. From here over, you can see where we have painted it. 2 coats. Now, a column can be a source of a lot of work and maintenance on any preservation residence or commercial building. They stand tall, they stand proud, they're almost always at the front door. You want to protect your columns the best you can because they're right as you walk in. Protecting a column requires the weep hose. It requires a lot of prep work to them. There are buildings in Lexington that we do maintenance on the columns every 2 or 3 years. If this column's 170 plus years old, which is the case, it needs to have its maintenance so the bottom half of this column doesn't have to be cut off and rebuilt, or the top half, or parts of it get completely rotten. Columns have all of those problems and they happen frequently. Large commercial buildings in different towns have columns much taller than this. And in terms of maintenance of columns, doing all the appropriate steps of prep work with the epoxies, the liquid epoxies, all of those products come from your local paint store. All of those need to be used on your column to keep your column integrity. It is very easy for a column to lose integrity and have to have large portions taken out of it. This column, we were discussing about the prep work on this column, how each column can take several days to do the right amount of prep work. This column has been wrapped at some point in time. You can see the wrinkles in this column. At some point, someone took a shortcut and wrapped this column in a scrim or a fabric, and then they skimmed over top of this. That is a way to try to stabilize a column, but it's a shortcut. It's not the best way to stabilize a column. These 2 columns, this column and the column next to me, are original to the house. You can tell they're original by the circumference of the top of the column. The 3rd column over, or the 4th column from the corner, has a smaller circumference at the top. That is a replacement column, whereas these are original. And in the original column, you can see cracking, stressing, fracturing. That would all need to be mechanically sanded and brought down to stable substrate. All of these cracks and fractures are not stable. If water gets in here, then a big portion of this column can delaminate the paint, and then the column itself has more freeze-thaw, which can cause a lot more structural integrity problems. Now, both of these columns have problems at the base, which is very common in columns. This column, you can see from the side how we have the layers of wood, which is how these original columns would have been built. And you can tell from the column over there, there is a band or strap around that column, and you can see that it was wrapped. We just showed you prep work at the bottom of that column because the bottom is an area that is always a problem. But you can tell from these other 2 columns that we could do a good bit of prep work and restoration work to the bottom of them to rebuild the integrity of the wood and the shape. And there's some water issues in this column, which we did not do prep work to, but you can see from here that paint is coming off and it's getting into the body of that column. An example of how much work columns require, and on the front of this house every 3 years would be good work for a column. There's a column up closer to the house, which we did a little bit of facial work on that I would like to show you now. We're at the front entryway now, and the 2 columns on my sides are columns I'm going to talk about. The door behind me is an main entrance into the residence, and the home is fairly well preserved. You can probably see in the background. The homeowners did a beautiful job of preservation. This column has a great deal of fracture and stress cracks all the way up. I think you can see some of them all the way around this column, which causes some integrity issues to this column. This one had the same thing about 3 hours ago. We took a palm sander and sanded all of the stress cracks out, filled the stress cracks, and painted it. Now, this column is very smooth and should last the owner for several years. Yes, the rest of the main entrance needs the same treatment done, so it will show well at the front of the house. But these stress cracks get moisture in them, and the moisture will cause these columns to have some problems. But as you're entering this residence, these columns are the presentation right at the front door. So it made the most sense to make sure these looked good and had a good appearance for people visiting this lovely home. This specific panel and slats are on the other end of the front of the house. And as you can tell from the decorative tree that's close to this, moisture is going to be a problem. It's not back cut enough to stay off of the wood, but it's a beautiful decorative tree. So this wood has a lot of problems. And this specific panel, these 3 panels, I have just scraped and started to sand, but you can tell from the look of these 3 panels, they get a lot of weather and problems because the moisture that stays on these panels causes integrity problems to the wood and to the panels. When you're doing restoration work, you want to be aware of this kind of moisture. Oftentimes, we will go through and back cut the wood for owners so that it will have the ability to breathe. This specific wood, the panel has come loose, needs to have fillers and wood epoxies used to make this more stable. Caulks and fillers will not do the trick. Now, this has had a lot of moisture on it, so even though it wouldn't seem like it, this small portion of this house will take as much work as the columns out front because of the moisture and the damage that is happening to the wood. You can hear the difference in the wood there. Moisture has got into it and caused it to lift. Thank you so much for visiting it with us here in the home in Harrodsburg. As you have walked around this lovely home and seen its integrity, there are a few things that we have been working on to improve the ability for this home to last many years to come and to make it look good as you drive past it. Old homes have some warts, they have some problems, that's part of their character, and in terms of their character, we're only trying to improve and get a long life for the paint job and for the preservation of this structure through doing it by the numbers, not taking shortcuts, and getting the very best finishes on the substrates possible. We thank you for your time this afternoon.